at a carefully choreographed political event called the National Congress.
China's Communist Party unveils its new leadership over the next 5 years.
The order of appearance is symbolic. The first person to emerge is the head of the party for the next 5 years. At the most recent event in October 2022, that person was Xi Jinping, China's president for the last 10 years, who walked out in the top spot a historic third time after getting rid of China's presidential term limit that restricted all his predecessors to 2 terms, a signal that he may be planning to stay in power for life. The world hasn't seen a Chinese leader like this since Mao Zedong, the revolutionary founder of the People's Republic of China, whose ruthless dictatorship scarred the Chinese people for generations. Xi has been compared to Mao a lot, and he clearly draws from Mao's playbook. But there's something else that connects these two. When Xi was just a young boy, Mao ruined his life. Generations apart, their paths crossed unexpectedly, and a teenage Xi from an elite family in Beijing ended up in exile, condemned to hard labor in the countryside. 50 years later, Xi is one of the most powerful political figures in the world and the only leader since Mao to have unchecked power over China. So how did he go from being banished in his country to taking complete control of it? Xi Jinping's connection to Mao formed long before Xi was even born. It goes back to when a bloody civil war was raging in China. A group of radical communist revolutionaries, including Mao, gained influence over large swaths of mainland China and controlled a communist military called the Red Army that fought the Nationalist Party ruling the Republic of China at the time. At this point, the communists were losing bad. The bulk of their army was pinned down here, in a communist-controlled region originally established by Mao, now surrounded by nationalist forces. And they were running low on food. So the Red Army decided to launch a bold attack to break through the nationalist forces and evacuate the roughly 130,000 communist soldiers and civilians stuck here. On October 16, 1934, they made their move and attacked a weaker part of the enemy line. They broke through. And even though their numbers quickly dropped, with the beginning of a year-long historic retreat called the Long March, the journey to establish a new communist base far from the nationalist forces. Mao, who used to be a military leader, wasn't in charge at this time. He'd insisted on using guerrilla tactics, which had heavily influenced the Red Army earlier in the war, but that approach had fallen out of favor and he was demoted. The Long March changed that. After escaping the siege here, the Red Army continued to suffer relentless attacks by the pursuing Nationalist Army. The military leaders of the march had pushed for a more traditional wartime strategy of direct confrontation rather than Mao's guerrilla tactics. And the result was catastrophic for the Red Army. Less than half of the original escape group survived the first 3 months alone. So it was at this first stopping point where Communist Party leader Zhou Enlai handed military leadership back to Mao. And Mao picked an endpoint for the march. Here, 800 miles away in rural northern China. But they didn't go straight for it. Mao led the Red Army deep into the mountains where he predicted lighter resistance. And he was right. But the journey was still brutal. It was 9 more months of non-stop marching and fighting along this several thousand-mile route before they ultimately arrived in northern China, where a guerrilla base led by a communist revolutionary named Shi Zhongshun offered Mao's army refuge, bringing the Long March to an end. That man was Xi Jinping's father. In the end, fewer than 8,000 of the original marchers survived. Even though thousands died on the Long March from starvation, fighting, and disease, Mao's leadership was credited with saving the Red Army from total annihilation, and he became the de facto head of the party as well as the military, entrusted with rebuilding the army to take on the nationalist forces for total control of China.
Wherever and however the Red troops move into battle, they spread the glory of Mao Zedong.
This is a good stopping point in the story to talk about how power in the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, works. Officially, the highest level of authority is a group called the Central Committee and is responsible for all of the party's major policy decisions. Within the Central Committee is a select group of officials called the Political Bureau, or Politburo. In most communist parties, like that of the former Soviet Union, the Politburo represents the most powerful members of the party besides the General Secretary. But the Chinese Communist Party has a key distinction that makes it unique. It has one more, even smaller selection of top officials who ultimately have the final say, an elite class of Politburo members called the Politburo Standing Committee. This group, which includes the General Secretary, holds supreme control over the Central Committee, dictates the will of the party, and is in full control of the Central Military Commission, which oversees China's defense. Mao's promotion during the Long March landed him here, in the highest position of the military and the Politburo Standing Committee. Even though he was considered the de facto head of the party when the Long March ended in 1935, he officially became head of the party in 1943. With both the party and the military under his control, Mao began to exploit the system to ensure he remained at the top for the rest of his life. At Mao's first National Congress as the official party leader in 1945, the party introduced a resolution that brought his influence to a whole new level. It unified the party around a single understanding of its history and declared Mao's political ideology, later called Mao Zedong thought, or Maoism, as the unquestioned guiding principle of the Chinese Communist Party. Basically, Mao's ideas or policy decisions could no longer be challenged by anyone. It was here he unveiled his equivalent at the time of the Politburo Standing Committee, the four other top party leaders, all long marchers deeply loyal to Mao, like Liu Shaoqi and Zhou Enlai, who'd go on to hold some of the most powerful positions in the future government. 4 years later, Mao declared final victory for the communists in the decades-long Chinese Civil War and established a new country, the People's Republic of China, or PRC.
Mao Zedong, once a lowly party worker, now assumed the stature of the dominant figure in all of Eastern Asia.
But winning a revolution isn't the same as running a country.
Because now that you're running a country, there's all these other things you have to do, like deliver the mail and like build a dam and stuff like that. You can't possibly have the party do all these things.
So the party set up a government that would take the policy decisions made by the Politburo Standing Committee and figure out a way to make them a reality.
And so it evolved to a system where the party would make all the important decisions, and especially the Politburo Standing Committee. Then, as it is today, many of these decisions would go to the State Council. So the State Council is the highest decision-making body on the state side, led by the Premier of China.
The Premier of China, by the way, is almost always a member of the Politburo Standing Committee. One way Mao kept a tight grip on power over the years was by promoting those loyal to him to top positions in the party and government, whether they had government experience or not. For example, Zhou Enlai, the former party leader who helped Mao rise to power during the Long March, became China's first premier.
The advantage of that is that they could never challenge him. The disadvantage of that is they didn't know what they were doing, and so administration suffered, policy outcomes suffered.
Long March survivors often became party elites under Mao. Xi Jinping's father, for example, was appointed Secretary General of the State Council. And as the son of a Long Marcher, young Xi was given the informal title of Princeling. Mao succeeded in never giving up his power during his lifetime. His unchecked policies resulted in massive famines and widespread persecution that cost between 40 and 80 million lives over a span of decades, and culminated in the disastrous Cultural Revolution, a violent final attempt from Mao to consolidate his power and force loyalty to the practice of Maoism. The idea was to make himself and his ideas eternal, the way he viewed communist figureheads like Lenin and Marx before him. Anyone that didn't fall in line with Mao's ideology was publicly humiliated, impoverished, excluded from society, and in many cases, executed, either at the hands of the army or by a militant youth group obsessed with enforcing Maoism, the Red Guards. Even those closest to the dictator weren't safe from his purges during the Cultural Revolution. High-level officials, including members of the Politburo Standing Committee and Long Marchers, were removed from their positions. Liu Shaoqi was denounced as a traitor and died while imprisoned under harsh conditions. Mao also removed the chief of staff of the army and replaced him with a Maoist, leaving no one left to oppose him in the military. Mao's handpicked successor, who always appeared loyally by his side in photos and propaganda posters, died under mysterious circumstances when his plane crashed as he was fleeing to the Soviet Union. Mao later denounced him as a traitor. He denounced Xi's father, too. This is a photo of Xi Sr. being restrained and publicly criticized by the Red Guards at the height of the Cultural Revolution. He would remain a prisoner in Beijing for 8 years following this. With his father purged, Xi Jinping, 15 at the time, was expelled from his elite school in Beijing and sent to work in the countryside.
He had to live in a cave and, do hard manual labor. His food was barely enough for, a growing young person. And Chairman Mao was responsible for all of it.
But then Mao died. The Cultural Revolution ended. His successor was Deng Xiaoping, one of the Politburo Standing Committee members who was removed from power during the Cultural Revolution, who, just before Mao died, started making a promise to fellow exiled party veterans.
Deng Xiaoping signaled credibly to all the surviving long marchers that he wanted to rehabilitate people. So when Mao died, they all supported the rehabilitation of Deng. And as soon as Deng was rehabilitated, he went ahead and rehabilitated all these people.
With experienced leadership back in place, the party needed to figure out how to prevent something like this from ever happening again. In order to undo Mao's cult of personality, the party introduced a second historical resolution in 1981. It condemned periods of Mao's rule and emphasized a renewed commitment to collective leadership, vowing to oppose the consolidation of power around one person moving forward.
The successors to Mao didn't want a dictatorship, so they divided up these positions and put them in the hands of different people.
Like Mao, Deng kept tight control over the Central Military Commission as its chairman, and held a leadership position in the government, but was never head of state. He never held the highest position in the party either. Instead, he set up a new advisory commission and served as its chairman, which allowed him to influence the party's direction without positioning himself directly on top of it. This allowed a power-sharing structure while still making Deng the de facto leader of China until he stepped down in 1989, following the army's massacre of students protesting in Tiananmen Square.
A protester suddenly ran into the middle of the street and in front of the oncoming tanks.
Anger at Deng Xiaoping, the entire Chinese government, it had the real feeling of rebellion in the streets of Beijing.
People want to fight the military out of their city.
Deng and his ideology, which moved away from Maoism, set a precedent of sharing power. He opened up China and established economic ties with these countries, and was the first PRC leader to visit the U.S. in 1979.
Today we take another step in the historic normalization of relations which we have begun this year.
Deng's reforms became the foundation for decades of economic prosperity that led China to having the world's second largest economy over time and being on the verge of becoming the world's next superpower.
Communism is creating a consumer society.
It also reminds you that the standard of living in China is going up. Here, capitalism rules.
One thing power sharing did lead to was a lot of policy innovation and then some degree of decentralization. And both of these things helped China's economy enormously.
Which is why this period of economic growth and reform, stretching over roughly 30 years, is known as the Deng era. And whether he wanted to or not, Deng kept his word and never tried to consolidate absolute power around himself.
He did end up sharing power, and that set the stage for power sharing in the party until the rise of Xi Jinping.
So what was Xi doing all this time? When Mao died in 1976, Xi was back in Beijing studying communist philosophy. Even though the Chinese Communist Party had ruined Xi's family, he had joined it, just as the Cultural Revolution was winding down. But why?
Personally, he might begrudge Chairman Mao for doing all these terrible things to his family, but I think at this time he also recognized that in the system of the Chinese Communist Party, power is everything. Without power, you're nothing.
But in order to get that power, Xi did something unexpected. He left Beijing.
As his competitors were fiercely competing with each other in the 1980s and 1990s, he sort of got out of their way and went to the provinces.
He took positions in party leadership in rural, poor provinces all around China, where there were no other princelings to compete with. First in Hebei, a poor rural province outside of Beijing, where he easily reached the top spot as party secretary. Then in Fujian, a heavily militarized region where top members of the army were stationed. He moved up the ranks to party secretary here too, before becoming the governor of the province a few years later. After making powerful friends in the military, Xi went here, where he once again assumed the office of party secretary and grew his support on the civilian side. This strategy of moving around didn't just give Xi a leg up in areas where competition was slim, it also gave him credibility as a humble, hardworking party leader. And he cultivated a growing group of supporters who would come back into play years down the line. It was his last stop, and his shortest one, that ultimately got him back to Beijing. A brief stint in the top party spot in Shanghai in 2007, where he rehabilitated the city's image following a high-level corruption scandal. Xi developed a reputation here as a prudent leader who towed the party line. Just 7 months later, he finally returned to Beijing, having been promoted to the all-powerful Politburo Standing Committee.
Basically, the people who were deciding on top leadership, they wanted a princeling, but they didn't want a princeling who was too ambitious or too strong. So Xi Jinping, he was seen as less ambitious because he was willing to go to the countryside and work in lower level positions.
When Xi emerged at the 2007 National Congress and leadership unveiling, 9 most powerful men in the country. It was at this moment that his strategism over 17 long years in the countryside paid off, big time. When the General Secretary stepped down in 2012, Xi emerged at the top spot in the party as China's leader. Now, the elite son of a former revolutionary, turned exiled peasant, turned party darling, was put in Xi's control of everything. Like Mao, Xi Jinping believes that rallying around a single figure is crucial to the party's survival, rather than the collective leadership Deng's reforms had normalized. So pretty much as soon as Xi Jinping came to power, he started getting rid of people.
The news 4 top officials removed for taking bribes was announced on state TV.
Xi Jinping has just sacked his foreign minister, just sacked his defense minister. He's sacked a whole lot of other people at the top of the military establishment.
The former security czar has not been seen in public for more than a year. The investigation against Xu allows the Chinese president to remove those opposed to his reforms.
He launched a major anti-corruption campaign as soon as he took power in late 2012, early 13, which led to the arrests of hundreds of senior level officials, as well as military officers.
These purges targeted Xi's rivals in the party, whose vacant positions he filled with his own supporters.
After this massive purge, Xi Jinping was in very tight control over both the party and also the Chinese military, thereby making him the most powerful leader of the Chinese Communist Party since the death of Mao.
That pattern continued in the second term, where he unveiled 5 new faces of the Politburo Standing Committee, 3 of them with close personal ties to Xi. In 2021, Xi pulled off one of his most dramatic acts yet, to enforce his influence over the Chinese Communist Party. He introduced a 3rd historic resolution that unified the party's ideology around one clear line of thinking: Xi Jinping thought. Xi's personal political ideology would now be the core in the party's thinking, political stance, and action. Basically, Xi Jinping's ideas could no longer be challenged, and they weren't for many years. During Xi's first 10 years in power, the size of China's economy more than doubled. So did average individual income. So did military spending. Under his leadership, China's presence on the world stage has grown too, positioning the rising superpower to take on the role of an aggressor externally, reasserting claims over parts of the South China Sea, intimidating Taiwan and Tibet, and stripping democratic process in Hong Kong. Inside its own borders, strict internet censorship and surveillance are widespread. And oppression of Uyghurs, a mostly minority Muslim ethnic group, is marked by human rights abuses. But it wasn't until COVID that she saw the first real challenge to his authority.
Anger in China is growing.
Video showing protesters in Xinjiang fed up with China's zero COVID rules. The boldest public challenge yet for leader Xi Jinping.
With these protests all around the country and the party's reputation in peril, Xi reversed the failed policy, but is now faced with a shaky economy and cracks in his unchecked authority. It was just weeks before the widespread protests at the 20th National Congress in 2022 that Xi walked out in the leading position a third time. He had already locked in the presidency for another 5 years and unveiled a Politburo Standing Committee completely packed with those loyal to him, after removing the final senior members of the party that had ties to his predecessor. Now, there is no one left in party or military leadership whose ideology differs from Xi.
I don't think anyone can push him out at this point. I think he will be the most powerful leader in China as long as he's alive and conscious.
Thanks so much for watching this episode of Atlas. So many teammates worked on this piece. A small army of editors, animators, and researchers helped bring this complicated story into focus. I'd especially like to shout out Raja, one of the key researchers on this piece, who conducted an incredible interview with our expert, Victor Xi. It takes a lot of resources to make these videos, but we publish our work free to watch here because we think journalism should be accessible to everyone. If you believe in keeping journalism free and want to support our continuing work, go to vox.com/give now to make a contribution. Thanks again. These are the 7 most powerful men in China. They represent the top leadership positions of the ruling party, and their identities are revealed every 5 years at a carefully choreographed political event called the National Congress.
China's Communist Party unveils its new leadership over the next 5 years.
The order of appearance is symbolic. The first person to emerge is the head of the party for the next 5 years. At the most recent event in October 2022, that person was Xi Jinping, China's president for the last 10 years, who walked out in the top spot a historic 3rd time after getting rid of China's presidential term limit that restricted all his predecessors to 2 terms, a signal that he may be planning to stay in power for life. The world hasn't seen a Chinese leader like this since Mao Zedong, the revolutionary founder of the People's Republic of China, whose ruthless dictatorship scarred the Chinese people for generations. Xi has been compared to Mao a lot, and he clearly draws from Mao's playbook. But there's something else that connects these two. When Xi was just a young boy, Mao ruined his life. Generations apart, their paths crossed unexpectedly, and a teenage Xi from an elite family in Beijing ended up in exile, condemned to hard labor in the countryside. 50 years later, Xi is one of the most powerful political figures in the world and the only leader since Mao to have unchecked power over China. So how did he go from being banished in his country to taking complete control of it? Xi Jinping's connection to Mao formed long before Xi was even born. It goes back to when a bloody civil war was raging in China. A group of radical communist revolutionaries, including Mao, gained influence over large swaths of mainland China and controlled a communist military called the Red Army that fought the Nationalist Party ruling the Republic of China at the time. At this point, the communists were losing bad. The bulk of their army was pinned down here, in a communist-controlled region originally established by Mao, now surrounded by nationalist forces. And they were running low on food. So the Red Army decided to launch a bold attack to break through the nationalist forces and evacuate the roughly 130,000 communist soldiers and civilians stuck here. On October 16, 1934, they made their move. and attacked a weaker part of the enemy line. They broke through, and even though their numbers quickly dropped, with thousands dying and thousands more fleeing to the countryside, around 86,000 stuck together and pushed on. This was the beginning of a year-long historic retreat called the Long March, the journey to establish a new communist base far from the nationalist forces. Mao, who used to be a military leader, wasn't in charge at this time. He'd insisted on using guerrilla tactics, which had heavily influenced the Red Army earlier in the war, but that approach had fallen out of favor and he was demoted.
Xi Jinping. He was the General Secretary of the Communist Party of China. He was born in Beijing on 15 June 1953. His father's name was Xi Zhongxin, and mother's name was Kai Xin. His father was a politician, and mother was a historian. In 1962, the elder Xi was removed from his position of vice premier and later imprisoned. The teenaged son was sent to the rural village of Liangjia to work and live among the locals, with whom he was very popular. While in Liangjia, he lived in a typical cave-like dwelling, fetched water from a well, and subsisted mainly on rice gruel. After 7 years, he went to Tsinghua University in the capital city of Beijing to study chemical engineering. Tsinghua University produces much of China's governing elite. Throughout his youth, Xi had tried to join the Communist Party several times. He was consistently rejected due to his father's broken relationship with the party. In 1974, he was finally received into the party, beginning his political career as an aide to Zheng Biao. Zheng was a top leader of the People's Liberation Army. Xi served 3 years as the party's secretary in the Hebei province of China. Transferred to Fujian in 1985, he worked in various party posts, beginning as deputy mayor of Xiamen. He proposed several infrastructure improvements, all of which were rejected by the provincial authorities. Xi married Qi Lingaling, later divorced. In 1987, he married folk singer Peng Liyuan. Same year, Xi transferred to Ningde, where he served as a district party chief. He launched a conservation campaign that beautified the major artery connecting Ningde to the greater Fujian province. In 1992, the couple had their only child, a daughter named Xi Mingx. He was the party leader in Fuzhou, the provincial capital, from 1998 to 2000. Credited with stimulating foreign investment, Xi revitalized the historical 3 lanes and 7 alleys section. His reputation as an honest and efficient politician rose steadily during his time in Fujian province. In 2000, he was named Fujian's provincial governor. In 2003, he moved to the province of Zhejiang, where he served as governor and party secretary. During his tenure, private industry quadrupled its research and development investment in the province. In 2007, he was picked to lead the party in Shanghai. As with his other appointments, this was made on account of his reputed integrity in the wake of scandal. 2008 was a watershed year for Xi Jinping. He was named to the Standing Committee of the Communist Party, and, shortly thereafter, Vice President of the PRC. In 2012, he assumed the position of General Secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China. As China is a one-party state, this is functionally the most powerful position in the country. Later that same year, Xi was elected president, a title that confers upon him the position of head of state. Together with his political supremacy, he qualifies for the designation of paramount leader. Among his writings is The Governance of China, a compilation of political philosophy released in 2014 by ICP Intercultural Press. It places among the top 50 in the politics and government, Asian category of the Amazon rankings. In the same year, Shanghai Jiaotong University Presses published Approachable, The Charm of Xi Jinping's Words, a collection of quotes by President Xi. President Xi Jinping was honored by the Cuban government in 2014 with the Order of José Martí, the highest honor Cuba can confer. China will continue to play its part as a major and responsible country, said Xi Jinping.
A historical resolution adopted by the Chinese Communist Party Central Committee in 2021 put Xi Jinping on par with party immortals Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping. It came 1 year before the landmark 20th Party Congress, where Xi is expected to further consolidate his status as the country's core leader, completing his rise to China's pinnacle of power. A historic third term as Communist Party General Secretary. When the nation's top legislature removed a presidential two-term limit in 2018, the move paved the way for Xi Jinping to remain in the role indefinitely. While the country's new paramount leader may have only been known overseas since becoming vice president, his ascent to power was decades in the making. As the first Chinese leader born after the founding of the People's Republic, Xi is among the few remaining children of party revolutionaries, otherwise known as political princelings. His father, Xi Zhongxun, was a communist revolutionary who rose to become a vice premier, only to be purged during the Cultural Revolution. Those ties initially posed a hurdle for the younger Xi, who failed 9 times to get into the Communist Party before eventually gaining membership. At the height of the Cultural Revolution, Xi was among the so-called sent-down youth deployed to the countryside as part of Mao's re-education program. Xi was sent to work in Shanxi province in the remote village of Liangzhehe. The place has since been turned into a tourist attraction after Xi became party leader. The 7 years Xi spent in the northwestern province proved to be formative for the 15-year-old, who has said time there shaped his political views. Liangzhehe is also where he launched his political career. After serving as party chief in the village, Xi rose through the ranks to become party secretary of Hebei province. In 1985, he traveled to the U.S., where he spent time in the American Midwest, living with a family in Iowa for 2 weeks to study U.S. farming practices. He would later travel back to the town in 2012 as China's vice president. From Hebei party secretary, Xi moved on to southern Fujian province to become governor, before being posted to neighboring Zhejiang as governor and party secretary. His tenure during those years laid the foundation for his future rise in the party hierarchy. His path to the top was further confirmed in 2007 when he was named party secretary of China's financial center, Shanghai. By 2008, Xi was appointed the country's vice president, setting the stage for him to succeed then President Hu Jintao. When Xi assumed the top job in 2012, he quickly consolidated power and introduced sweeping institutional reforms. The approach was seen as a departure from the collective leadership that had become the norm in the post-Deng era. Forming a highly centralized top-down leadership, Xi revisited his approach in Zhejiang and Shanghai, asserting party control over the economy and ideology, while streamlining and upgrading the military. Xi's reforms also extended to rooting out government corruption, which included the arrests of high-ranking officials, such as former Chongqing party boss Bo Xilai and ex-security chief Zhou Yongkang. But some critics say they were also targeted because they were seen as Xi's political rivals. Xi also clamped down on dissent in Xinjiang, where he ordered a hard strike on violence in the far western region in 2014. He set out two centenary goals: to make China a moderately prosperous society by 2021 and to turn it into a great modern socialist country by 2049. In mid-2021, Xi declared that the country had achieved the first goal. Months earlier, he also announced the nation had eliminated extreme poverty.
中国共产党成立100周年的重要时刻，我国脱贫攻坚战取得了全面胜利，区域性整体贫困得到解决，完成了消除绝对贫困的艰巨任务，创造了又一个彪炳史册的人间奇迹。
As China's most influential leader in recent years, Xi has managed to put a stamp on nearly all aspects of Chinese society by elevating Xi Jinping thought to state ideology. Coining the term the Chinese dream, otherwise known as the Great National Rejuvenation, Xi Jinping thought aims to achieve common prosperity. Xi has also raised China's influence abroad, promoting its success as a model for developing countries and challenging the US-led world order. A concrete example is Xi's signature project, the Belt and Road Initiative. Launched in 2013, China's global infrastructure development strategy has extended China's clout to developing countries in Europe, Asia, and Africa. Beijing has followed an assertive foreign policy under Xi, adopting a firm stance in its dealings with Washington and tough positions on Taiwan and the South China Sea. While on the domestic front, Xi has staked his leadership on a zero-COVID policy to control the pandemic, even as the country's economy suffered a slowdown from lockdowns and other COVID restrictions. The last 10 years will culminate at the upcoming 20th Party Congress, where he's widely expected to be confirmed to serve an unprecedented third term, cementing Xi Jinping's place in the history of China's Communist Party.
इस वीडियो को देखिए एक बार।
चीन के पूर्व राष्ट्रपति हू जिनताओ को राष्ट्रपति जिनपिंग के सामने इस बैठक से जबरन बाहर निकाल दिया गया।
और वीडियो फुटेज में ऐसा लग रहा है कि वो बाहर जाना नहीं चाहते थे। चाइनीज स्टेट मीडिया ने कहा कि हू जिनताओ को बाहर भेजना पड़ा क्योंकि वो बीमार थे। और कुछ लोग कह रहे हैं कि शी जिनपिंग ने जानबूझकर किया क्योंकि वो दुनिया के सामने ये दिखाना चाहते थे कि चाइना में किसके पास पावर है। अब चाइना की कम्युनिस्ट पार्टी में सबसे इम्पोर्टेंट कमेटी होती है जिसको कहा जाता है पोलिट ब्यूरो स्टैंडिंग कमेटी। और 2017 और 2022 के बीच इस कमेटी का चेहरा ही बदल गया है और इस कमेटी में अब वही लोग हैं जो शी जिनपिंग को सपोर्ट करते हैं। और सबसे बड़ा डिसीजन लिया शी जिनपिंग ने जब उन्होंने प्रेसिडेंशियल टर्म लिमिट ही हटा दी, जिसका मतलब है कि वो चाइना के प्रेसिडेंट हो सकते हैं अपनी पूरी जिंदगी भर। कई लोग मानते हैं कि शी जिनपिंग चाइना के पुराने रूलर माओ जेडोंग की तरह है जो फुल कंट्रोल चाहते हैं पूरे देश पर। अब चाहे इन दोनों में सिमिलैरिटी जरूर है पर शी जिनपिंग का तरीका बहुत अलग है। और इस वीडियो में मैं आपको बताना चाहता हूँ कि शी जिनपिंग इतने पावरफुल कैसे हुए चाइना में, और उससे ज्यादा जरूरी है कि इसका क्या इम्पैक्ट होगा पूरी दुनिया पर। अगर आप हॉलीवुड मूवीज देखते हैं तो आपने अमेरिकन ड्रीम के बारे में सुना होगा।
You got a dream, you got to protect it.
जहाँ लोग ये मानते हैं कि अमेरिका में आप मेहनत के बलबूते कुछ भी हासिल कर सकते हो। पर क्या आपने चाइनीज ड्रीम के बारे में सुना है? ये चीज मेंशन करी थी शी जिनपिंग ने 2012 में जब वो चाइनीज प्रेसिडेंट बने ही थे।
We will achieve the goal of building a great modern socialist country in respect and fulfill the Chinese dream.
अब जहाँ अमेरिकन ड्रीम का फोकस होता है आपकी इच्छाओं पर, चाइनीज ड्रीम का फोकस है चाइना के देश पर। शी जिनपिंग चाहते हैं कि चाइना उतना ही पावरफुल हो जाए पूरी दुनिया में जैसे वो था एक जमाने में। 18th सेंचुरी तक इंपीरियल चाइना दुनिया का लीडर था कल्चर, साइंस या फिर टेक्नोलॉजी के मामले में। इनफैक्ट 1820 में जब चिंग डायनेस्टी चाइना को रूल कर रही थी तो दुनिया की जीडीपी का 30% हिस्सा चाइना का था। पर 1839 में अंग्रेज और चाइना के बीच एक वॉर हुई। इस वॉर का नाम था फर्स्ट ओपियम वॉर। और ये वॉर स्टार्ट हुई थी क्योंकि चाइना ने बैन कर दिया था अंग्रेजों को ओपियम ट्रेड करना अपने पोर्ट से। 3 साल बाद चाइना ये जंग हार गया, जिसके बाद चाइना को एक ट्रीटी साइन करनी पड़ी। और इस ट्रीटी में एक डिमांड थी कि चाइना को हांगकांग अंग्रेजों को देना होगा। इस चीज के बाद अगले करीब 110 सालों तक चाइना को कई और हारें झेलनी पड़ी, जिसकी वजह से चाइनीज हिस्टोरियंस इस पीरियड को बुलाते हैं हिस्ट्री ऑफ ह्यूमिलिएशन। और ऐसा नहीं कि चाइना इस 110 साल के पीरियड को भूल गया है। चाहे हिस्ट्री बुक्स की बात करें, टीवी सीरीज या फिर न्यूज़पेपर आर्टिकल्स, ये सभी चाइनीज लोगों को लगातार बताते रहते हैं इन्हीं हारों के बारे में। आज भी कई चाइनीज उस पीरियड को लेकर गुस्से में है। और इसी वजह से वो ये मानते हैं कि ये दौर चाइना का है जहाँ चाइना एक ग्लोबल पावर बनेगी। और ऐसा ही मानते हैं शी जिनपिंग। इसी वजह से शी जिनपिंग के लिए आसान है अपना चाइनीज ड्रीम चाइना के लोगों को बेचना। और ये चीज अचीव करने के लिए शी जिनपिंग के 3 गोल्स हैं। पहला गोल है कि चाइना दुनिया में कल्चर को डोमिनेट करे। सेकेंड वर्ल्ड वॉर के बाद अमेरिका का सबसे बड़ा इम्पैक्ट रहा है दुनिया के कल्चर में, चाहे मूवीज हो, टीवी शोज हो, म्यूजिक हो या फिर वीडियो गेम्स हो। अब जाने या फिर ना जाने पर हमारी जिंदगी अमेरिकन कल्चर से बहुत ज्यादा इम्पैक्टेड है। क्या हम खाते हैं से लेकर क्या हम पहनते हैं। और शी जिनपिंग इसी चीज को चेंज करना चाहते हैं। पिछले 10 सालों के दौरान चाइनीज सरकार ने एक इंटरनेशनल मीडिया नेटवर्क डेवलप किया है और कई कल्चरल स्टडी सेंटर्स एस्टैब्लिश करे हैं। जैसे चाइना की प्राइमरी न्यूज एजेंसी शिन्हुआ के 200 से करीब फॉरेन ब्यूरोज है। कई पॉपुलर चाइनीज अखबार अब इंग्लिश में भी छापे जाते हैं। इसके अलावा कई चाइनीज यूनिवर्सिटीज अब दुनिया में वन ऑफ द बेस्ट है और कई फॉरेन स्टूडेंट्स उधर पढ़ने जाते हैं। फिर दूसरा गोल है शी जिनपिंग का एक यूनाइटेड और स्ट्रॉन्ग चाइना बनाने का। चाइना दुनिया की सबसे पॉपुलस कंट्री है जिसमें से सबसे डोमिनेंट एथनिक ग्रुप है हान चाइनीज, जिनकी पॉपुलेशन 90% से भी ज्यादा है। और शी जिनपिंग एक ऐसा चाइनीज देश चाहते हैं जहाँ लोग यूनाइटेड हो। इसका मतलब है कि वो लोगों के बीच ज्यादा कल्चरल डिफरेंसेस नहीं चाहते, जिसकी वजह से उन्होंने कई सख्त कदम उठाए हैं। जैसे शिनजियांग की मुस्लिम कम्युनिटी, जिसको वीगर्स भी कहा जाता है, उनकी पूरी आइडेंटिटी चेंज करने की कोशिश करी जा रही है।
那么我的 bonus 没有共产党就没有新中国共产党他请了为民主
मस्जिद तोड़ गए हैं और लाखों वीगर्स को डिटेंशन कैंप से बंद किया गया है जहां उनको री एजुकेट किया जाए उनके कल्चर और रिलीजन के बारे में। इसके अलावा एक और एग्जांपल देता हूं मैं आपको, ताइवान का। अक्टूबर में अपनी स्पीच में शी जिनपिंग ने कहा कि वो ताइवान को चाइना के साथ इंटीग्रेट करना चाहते हैं।
和领土完整，反对台独的坚强决心和强大能力。
और अगर किसी भी फॉरेन पावर ने उनको रोकने की कोशिश करी तो उसका जवाब वो मिलिट्री एक्शन से देंगे। और इसी वजह से शी जिनपिंग चाहते हैं कि चाइना पूरी दुनिया में सबसे मॉडर्न मिलिट्री बन जाए। दुनिया की अब लार्जेस्ट नेवी यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स नहीं है बल्कि चाइना है। जैसे फुजियान वन ऑफ द मोस्ट एडवांस्ड वॉरशिप है जो चाइना ने बनाई है। इसके अलावा चाइना के न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स भी 4 गुना बढ़ गए हैं। पर यूएस और चाइना जैसे देशों के लिए सबसे चिंता करने की बात है कि चाइना मिलिट्री, रोबोटिक्स और मिसाइल सिस्टम्स में आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस यूज करने लग गया है। और तीसरा गोल है उनका एक ब्यूटीफुल चाइना बनाने का। पिछले सालों के दौरान चाइना में बहुत तेजी से इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन हुई है जिसकी वजह से क्लाइमेट चेंज और पोल्यूशन का खतरा बहुत है।
On to China now, which has issued its first national drought alert.
और इस चीज को शी जिनपिंग चेंज करना चाहते हैं। इसी वजह से उन्होंने वादा दिया है कि 2060 तक चाइना कार्बन न्यूट्रल हो जाएगा। इसका मतलब है कि चाइना ग्लोबल वार्मिंग में इतना कंट्रीब्यूट नहीं कर रहा होगा। इसी वजह से चाइना रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी में इतनी ज्यादा इन्वेस्टमेंट्स कर रहा है। पूरी दुनिया में सबसे ज्यादा इलेक्ट्रिकल व्हीकल्स चाइना में बेची जाती हैं। पर इन सारी चीजों को करने के लिए शी जिनपिंग को पावर चाहिए थी और उन्होंने ये पावर मांग के नहीं ली बल्कि छीन के ली। शी जिनपिंग चाइना के प्रेसिडेंट बने 2012 में और एक एडवांटेज उनके पास थी कि उनके दौर से पहले चाइना की ग्रोथ रेट बहुत हाई थी। करीब 23 सालों के लिए चाइना लगातार 10% से ग्रो कर रहा था। तो फिर ऐसा क्या किया चाइना ने जिसकी वजह से उनकी तरक्की दिन दुगनी रात चौगनी हो गई? आप ये जान सकते हैं इस ऑडियो बुक से, हाउ चाइना गॉट रिच, जिसको आप सुन सकते हैं कुकू FM ऐप पर। इस ऑडियो बुक में ये भी बताया जाता है कि कैसे चाइना ने दूसरे देशों से मदद ली, जैसे सिंगापुर, जापान या फिर यूएस। और आपको ज्यादा समय भी नहीं लगेगा, सिर्फ 1.5 घंटे में आपको बहुत नॉलेज मिल सकती है चाइना की इकोनॉमिक्स और हिस्ट्री के बारे में। इसके अलावा कुकू FM में आपको कई और ऑडियो बुक्स मिलेंगी, बच्चों के लिए भी और बड़ों के लिए भी। और ये ऑडियो बुक्स भी बहुत डिफरेंट टॉपिक्स की हैं, जैसे सेल्फ हेल्प, मोटिवेशनल, करियर, बायोग्राफीज या फिर एंटरटेनमेंट। कुकू FM का एनुअल प्लान बस 399 रुपीज का है, यानी कि करीब ₹1 पर डे, जो एक फिजिकल किताब की कॉस्ट से भी कम है। और आपको 50% डिस्काउंट भी मिल सकता है अगर आप मोहक 50 का कूपन कोड यूज करोगे तो, जो पहले 250 यूजर्स के लिए है। तो आपको चेकआउट कीजिए, लिंक डिस्क्रिप्शन में है। पहला तरीका है जो कई पॉलिटिकल लीडर्स यूज करते हैं, चाहे वो व्लादिमीर पुतिन हो या फिर नरेंद्र मोदी, वो है अपनी एक पर्सनालिटी कल्ट बना के। जैसे ये एक बुक है चाइना में प्राइमरी स्कूल के स्टूडेंट्स के लिए। आप देख सकते हैं कि कैसे शी जिनपिंग एक लाल कलर का स्कार्फ पहना रहे हैं एक बच्चे को। इन फोटोज में आप देख सकते हैं कि कैसे वो बच्चों के साथ बातें कर रहे हैं। और इंटरेस्टिंग चीज बस फोटोज में नहीं है बल्कि फोटोज के नीचे टेक्स्ट में भी है। जैसे इधर लिखा है कि कैसे ग्रैंडपा शी जिनपिंग अपने काम में बिजी है, और चाहे वो कितने बिजी हो वो हमारे भविष्य के लिए चिंता करते हैं। और इस चीज से वो अपनी एक इमेज डेवलप कर रहे हैं बच्चों के दिमाग में कि वो एक अच्छे लीडर है जो लोगों की देखभाल करना चाहते हैं। और ये बस बच्चों को नहीं पढ़ाया जा रहा बल्कि यूनिवर्सिटी के स्टूडेंट्स को भी ऐसी ही चीजें बताई जाती हैं। शी जिनपिंग के ऊपर एक कार्टून भी बनी है जहाँ लोगों को बताया जाता है कि एक अच्छा लीडर कैसे बनते हैं।
He went on to become the thief and finally the party general secretary and the president.
चाइना के कई पॉलिटिकल ऑफिशियल्स को शी जिनपिंग के बारे में एक स्पेशल ऐप पे पढ़ना भी पड़ता है। तो आप देख सकते हैं कि कैसे इमेज बनाई जा रही है शी जिनपिंग के बारे में। जैसे कई चाइनीज न्यूज़पेपर्स उनको रेगुलरली बिग अंकल शी बुलाते हैं। एक स्टडी ने दिखाया कि कैसे शी जिनपिंग का नाम न्यूज़पेपर में कई बार छपता है तो चाइना के पुराने प्रेसिडेंट्स के साथ नहीं होता था। ऐसी इमेज की वजह से शी जिनपिंग ऐसे कई डिसीजंस ले पाते हैं जो उनका पॉलिटिकल कंट्रोल बढ़ाता है, पर लोग कंप्लेन नहीं करते क्योंकि लोग ये मानते हैं कि शी जिनपिंग तो हमारे भले के लिए कर रहे हैं ऐसा। होपफुली जिस तरीके से हम ये वीडियोस बना रहे हैं आपके भले के लिए, तो हमारी ग्रोथ को हेल्प करने के लिए प्लीज सब्सक्राइब टू द चैनल। अब आपको एक एग्जांपल देता हूँ कि इस इमेज की वजह से शी जिनपिंग कैसे पॉलिटिकल कंट्रोल ले पाते हैं। ये है सुन लीजुन, जो एक टाइम पर बहुत पावरफुल होते थे चाइनीज कम्युनिस्ट पार्टी में, पर इस साल उन पर इल्जाम लगाए गए कि वो पार्टी की यूनिटी को डैमेज कर रहे हैं, जिसकी वजह से उनको एक लाइफ सेंटेंस दिया गया। सुन लीजुन अकेले नहीं है। इस साल करीब 1000 1000 से ज्यादा ऑफिशियल्स को करप्शन या फिर दूसरे क्राइम के जरिए अरेस्ट किया गया है। अब कम्युनिस्ट पार्टी में करप्शन कोई नई बात नहीं है, पर एक्सपर्ट्स कहते हैं कि शी जिनपिंग इस करप्शन को यूज कर रहे हैं अपनी पावर और बढ़ाने के लिए, जिससे वो अपने दुश्मनों को जेल भेज सके। इसके बेसिकली दो फायदे हैं कि लोगों के दिमागों में उनकी इमेज और बेहतर हो जाती है कि देखो शी जिनपिंग तो करप्शन के खिलाफ लड़ाई कर रहे हैं, और दूसरा फायदा है कि दुश्मनों को हटाकर उनकी पावर और बढ़ जाती है। एक्सपर्ट्स कहते हैं कि अपने दुश्मनों को हटाकर शी जिनपिंग उन लोगों को अपॉइंट कर रहे हैं जो कई सालों से उनके साथ ही रहे हैं। और शी जिनपिंग बस कम्युनिस्ट पार्टी को कंट्रोल नहीं करना चाहते, बल्कि चाइना में पूरी जनता को भी कंट्रोल करना चाहते हैं। और वो ये कर रहे हैं दुनिया का सबसे बड़ा सर्वेलेंस नेटवर्क क्रिएट करके। जैसे एक चाइनीज शहर में हर 1000 लोगों के लिए 370 कैमराज है, जबकि दिल्ली में 1000 लोगों के लिए बस 26 कैमराज है। और इन सीसीटीवी कैमराज के अलावा अब हर ऐप जो यूज करते हैं अपने फोन पर, उससे चाइनीज सरकार डिसाइड करती है कि समाज में आपके साथ होना क्या चाहिए। ऐसे हर सिटीजन को एक सोशल क्रेडिट स्कोर दिया जाता है। अगर आप कम्युनिटी सर्विस करते हैं या फिर लोकल प्रोडक्ट्स खरीदते हैं तो आपका स्कोर बढ़ता है, जबकि अगर आप फ्रॉड करते हैं, टैक्स नहीं भरते या फिर उन एरियाज में स्मोकिंग करते हैं जहाँ अलाउड नहीं होता, तो आपका स्कोर कम होता है। और अगर आपका स्कोर कम हो गया चाइनीज सोसाइटी में, तो प्लेन टिकट्स खरीदने में आपको दिक्कत आ सकती है, घर खरीदने में, और हाई स्पीड इंटरनेट के लिए भी। चाइनीज सरकार के पास एक लिस्ट है डिसऑनेस्ट लोगों की, जिसमें जर्नलिस्ट, आर्टिस्ट और एक्टिविस्ट शामिल हैं, और चाइनीज सरकार ऐसे लोगों को अरेस्ट कर सकती है। चाइनीज सरकार का अल्टीमेट गोल है कि उनके पास हर सिटीजन का इतना डेटा हो कि वो सिटीजन्स जो अच्छी तरह बिहेव कर रहे हैं उनको प्रमोशंस मिले और अच्छी नौकरी मिले, वही वो सिटीजन जो अच्छी तरह काम नहीं कर रहे उनको जेल भेज दिया जाए, जिससे पूरी चाइनीज सोसाइटी एक परफेक्ट सोसाइटी हो जाए। तो आपके मन में सवाल होगा कि शी जिनपिंग के प्लान की वजह से इंडिया पर क्या असर पड़ेगा। जैसे हमने बात करी कि शी जिनपिंग फॉरेन पॉलिसी में अग्रेसिव है और अपनी मिलिट्री को भी एक्सपैंड कर रहे हैं, जिसके हमने इंडिया की तरफ उदाहरण देख लिए हैं, जैसे डोकलाम में 2017 में और गलवान वैली में 2020 में। अब ये जरूर है कि टेंशन थोड़ी ठंडी हो गई है इन इंसिडेंट्स के बाद, पर बॉर्डर में टेंशन बढ़ जाना कभी भी इतना नामुमकिन नहीं है, स्पेशली क्योंकि दोनों आर्मीज के बीच में फासला इतना बड़ा नहीं है। पर क्या इसका मतलब है कि दोनों देशों में वॉर हो सकती है? इसकी संभावना बहुत कम है, क्योंकि दोनों न्यूक्लियर देश हैं और ये क्लियर नहीं है कि वॉर से किसी भी देश को ज्यादा फायदा होगा। और अगर चाइना की डोमेस्टिक पॉलिटिक्स में कुछ चेंज आता है, जैसे मान लो चाइनीज इकोनॉमी की हालत थोड़ी गंभीर हो जाती है, तो इसकी संभावना है कि शी जिनपिंग नेशनलिज्म को यूज करें अपनी पॉपुलैरिटी चाइना में बढ़ाने के लिए। इसके अलावा चाइना ने कई स्ट्रेटेजिक इन्वेस्टमेंट्स करी है श्रीलंका और पाकिस्तान में, जिससे इंडिया चिंतित है, स्पेशली क्योंकि चाइना अपनी मिलिट्री प्रेजेंस बढ़ा रहा है इंडियन ओशन में। तो क्या शी जिनपिंग के अंडर इंडिया चाइना टेंशन बढ़ सकती है? हाँ, जरूर बढ़ सकती है, पर मोस्ट एक्सपर्ट्स मानते हैं कि शी जिनपिंग का इस चीज से इतना ज्यादा फायदा नहीं हो। पर ये जरूर है कि इंडिया चाइना के बीच में इकोनॉमिक टेंशन बढ़ सकती हैं। इसकी वजह से इंडियन सरकार ये कोशिश कर रही है कि ज्यादा से ज्यादा मैन्युफैक्चरिंग इंडिया में ही हो, ताकि उनको डिपेंड ना होना पड़े चाइना पर। जैसे रिसेंटली इंडियन सरकार सेमीकंडक्टर इंडस्ट्री में बहुत इन्वेस्टमेंट कर रही है, ताकि अगर कल इंडिया चाइना टेंशन बढ़ती हैं तो कम से कम इंडियन इकोनॉमी पर इतना असर ना पड़े। अगर इधर तक अगर वीडियो अच्छा लगा तो प्लीज सब्सक्राइब भी कीजिए चैनल को। और अगर आप इंडिया चाइना की सेमीकंडक्टर वॉर के बारे में और जानना चाहते हैं तो मैं आपको रेकमेंड करूंगा कि आप ये वीडियो जरूर देखिए, जहां हमने इसके बारे में डिटेल में बात करी है। तो चेकआउट कोको एफएम ऐप, लिंक डिस्क्रिप्शन में है, और मेरा कूपन कोड मोहक50 यूज कीजिए।
People's Republic of China, the world's second largest economy, the world's most populous country with over 1.4 billion people, and the only surviving communist superpower. Its rise and growth has been a subject of both admiration and fear, skepticism and suspicion. In a matter of a generation, Communist China's romance with Western-style capitalism brought about rapid transformation. transformation that a diminutive Deng Xiaoping chalked out, even as he created a political structure meant to outlive individual leaders. 36 years after Deng Xiaoping institutionalized the two-term ceiling for presidency, Xi Jinping allowed presidency for life. With this, Xi Jinping turned the CCP, or the Chinese Communist Party, back to where it started, a one-man institution. Over the years, through the tenures of Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao, the CCP had perfected governance through collective decision-making. This preempted another Mao-like personality cult, which had had disastrous consequences. This arrangement worked for 2 decades, till Xi Jinping toppled this delicate balance in 2012. The CCP machinery, which is the largest political outfit in the world, now plays second fiddle to one man's ambitions.
Why does he want, the third term? I think in the view of him and his supporters, you need to have the same leadership in for a number of years in order to get things done. The other view is that this is an egotistical dictator.
Born in 1953 in Beijing to a prominent revolutionary, Xi Zhongchun, he was 5 years of age when his father became the vice premier of China. Xi Jinping's family, like most elite Chinese families, faced the wrath of Mao's Red Army during the Cultural Revolution that gripped China in the mid-1960s. The revolution aimed to eliminate any capitalist tendencies in China and unleash widespread destruction of both property and people. As Xi Sr. fell from grace, overnight, he went from being a vice premier and the first secretary general of the State Council to a counter-revolutionary. In 1962, Xi Zhongchun fell out of favor with Chairman Mao. 6 years later, as a 15-year-old teenager, Xi Jinping was packed off to the coal mines of the Shanxi province as a sent-down youth. It was said in Shanxi, Xi Jinping had to feed pigs and even clear sewage. His life was a far cry from the sheltered one he had lived till then. But most elite Chinese families managed to send their children to regions where they had connections. Shanxi happened to be his father's old stronghold. Post the turmoil of the revolution, Xi Jinping became redder than red. But the party refused to embrace him, not till he made a record 10 attempts to enroll. And finally, in January 1974, Xi Jinping became a full-time member of the CCP. By this time, his father had also been rehabilitated and secured plum posts. After all, she was a princeling, which translated into privilege at crucial junctures in life and career. These are the sons and daughters of powerful and influential Chinese officials, politicians, and businessmen. Notwithstanding the victimization during the revolution, Xi Jinping reaped benefits that came with his father's elevated political status. Princelings, by virtue of their birth in prominent families, are entitled to elite schools and colleges, and later a launchpad into their chosen field, usually politics or business. And Xi Jinping got his fair share. After the revolution, Xi secured significant party positions. Incidentally, his career graph coincided with his father's return to active politics. In 1983, Xi Jinping became the secretary of Zhending County in Hebei province. 5 years later, he served as the secretary of the Ningde district in the southern province of Fujian, where his father's connections once again came handy. In 1994, Xi became the secretary of the Fuzhou Municipal Party and governor of Fujian Province in 2001. The following year, he became the party chief of the economically vibrant Zhejiang. It was here that Xi Jinping cultivated his image as a crusader for clean politics. But national politics was nowhere on the radar till 2006. It was Chen Lianggu's high-profile fall as the party chief in Shanghai that turned out to be Xi Jinping's big political break. In 2006, Chen was sacked for his role in the $4.8 billion pension fund scandal that rocked Chinese politics. Xi was chosen to replace the disgraced leader.
Overnight, the 53-year-old became a contender for national politics. Since the party secretary of Shanghai is an important position, it's usually represented in the Politburo. And so in 2007, Xi Jinping became a member of the Politburo Standing Committee. He was one among the 9 most powerful men running the world's most populous country, until then the world's 3rd largest economy. Cementing his political ascent, Xi Jinping became the vice president the following year. He was a compromise candidate for the presidential elections between the Jiang Zemin faction that favored Bo Xilai and the Hu Jintao faction that wanted Li Keqiang. After losing the power struggle to Xi Jinping, Li Keqiang later became the premier of China, a largely ceremonial position with little to no powers.
The following year, the power transition was complete. On 14th of March 2013, Xi Jinping became the 6th leader of his country and the first to be born after the brutal civil war. Along the way, he outmaneuvered rivals like Bo Xilai, who threatened to disturb the delicate balance between the party and the subjects. In just 6 years, Xi Jinping rose from political obscurity to become one of the most important world leaders. For the world, though, Xi was still an enigma. Known more by his popular opera singer wife than for his style of governance or administrative acumen. Preferring the company of fellow elite, Xi Jinping's 7-member Politburo in 2013 had 4 princelings. This was one of the highest in China's history. But for Xi, leaders without a pedigree were the primary cause for the widespread corruption in the party apparatus. This became the basis for the anti-corruption movement. It was the largest crackdown since the Tiananmen Square protest 25 years back. The Communist Party had announced the punishment of more than 100,000 officials on corruption charges. Some, like Yu Martin of Hong Kong's Morning Bell Press, were sentenced to a decade in prison on charges of smuggling 7 cans of paint. Xi's crackdown, just like Mao's purge, was aimed at eliminating any present or future leadership challenge.
He came up on an internal issue, corruption. He used that as he was selected by others to come up with not question of election. He was selected by others to come up, but then he used corruption. He had to clean it out because there was such a high level of corruption that if he didn't sort of weed it out, the whole Communist Party system would have come under pressure again, like in 1989. But in the process, it also enabled him to consolidate his position in the party.
Ahead of his coronation as the General Secretary, as Xi cracked the whip on corrupt leaders, reports surfaced about his own family's vast and deep business links. The business empire of his sister, Qi Qiaoqiao, and brother-in-law, Deng Jiaogui, was built on a network of companies in real estate, mining, and infrastructure. The companies were not directly linked to Xi Jinping. But during his tenure as a member of the Politburo Standing Committee between 2007 and 2011, the holding company of their businesses grew in assets from $2.7 million to $156 million. Elite Xi Jinping's clique comprised of several princelings, like Liu He, the current vice premier, Liu Yuan, son of former President Liu Shaoqi, and Wang Qishan, in charge of the all-important Central Commission on Discipline and Inspection that launched the anti-corruption campaign. Xi Jinping's tenure has been marked by an unprecedented concentration of power. In less than 6 months of coming to power, Xi managed to get all the 3 top political prizes for himself: the all-important General Secretary of the Communist Party, the Commander of the Armed Forces, and the title of the President.